If you're new, we're excited that you're here today. My name is Tim, and I get the honor and privilege of leading this amazing community. And this is kind of as we turn the page toward the end of the year. I don't know if you realize that, but it's like as soon as November gets here, it feels like it is a sprint to the end of the year. How many of you are already putting up Christmas decorations? Anybody already putting up some Christmas stuff? Okay, a few crazy people out there. But here's what we know, right? It's like as soon as Halloween is over, we just move straight toward the end of the year. And I know that my guess is your family has all kinds of end of the year traditions. You've probably Christmas and Thanksgiving and everything around this season. It can be such a beautiful season. And I want you to know, if you've maybe been coming to our church for just a little bit, maybe sometime this year, we've got some family traditions at our church as well, I want to tell you about. We've got some things that if you've never been through an end of the year with us, that I just wanted to let you know about, because I think it is one of my favorite seasons in our church, is the end of the year. First, if you've never been to Christmas here at X Church, you have to make plans. Make sure you're here for a Christmas experience, because it is like, we just take everything to the next level. We really believe that it is one of the greatest opportunities to share the message and hope of Jesus, and our world is the most open it ever will be during Christmas. And so I just would tell you right now, this is when our Christmas experience times come out, you just make sure you're gonna be there, make sure you're gonna get friends and family and people that would maybe never go to church, you invite them to Christmas. And I promise you they'll have a great time. And I just believe that they're gonna be impacted by his presence. That's the most important thing. So Christmas is incredible, but even leading up to it, we kind of have a tradition that we do every single year. We close out the year just celebrating how good God is to us. Can I just tell you, even if you had some difficulty this year, because we all have difficulty, and even if you had some financial challenges, because everybody's gonna have financial challenges, I always like to have a moment, at least at some point at the end of the year, where I can look back and go, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm breathing, my family's good. Like, God has been good to us, and we're still here. And so I believe that it's important that we not just start a season well, which we love to do, so the beginning of the year, we always love to kick it off with prayer and fasting and kind of center ourselves and say, God, what do you want to do in us this year? We're going to do that again this coming new year. But we also love to end our season, our year, with gratitude. We love to end it and celebrate like stories of what God's done in his goodness for the Balsamo family and other stories we're going to share for the next several weeks. And all of that's gonna culminate into a special weekend that we do every year. And this special weekend's coming up December 8th for our end of year offering. And I just wanna take a moment, and we're gonna talk more about some of the unique things that we're gonna do with this, some of the ministries that we're gonna help, some of the ways that we're gonna make an impact as a community through this end of the year offering. But I wanted to take just a moment and talk about it. Because if you're a regular here, you may know that we don't pass around the buckets every single week. We invite and encourage people to give and support and trust God. But we also don't take up any special offerings usually throughout the year. Now, we did a couple things throughout this year called Dollar Drop, where we had some moments where we said, look, if you just give $1 or so per family member, we can make a difference. And then we had the disaster relief, and so you all gave big to that, which was amazing. But I just want you to know, 100% of all of those things went directly to those ministries. This is different. This is the only time we usually do this all year. This is the time when we come and we invite our church to come and help us. Let's express our gratitude to God for all the things that he's done in our lives. And secondly, let's also give so that we can see God do even greater things in our community and through our church in this next year. Let's invest into what God can do so that we can go into the next year really strong. And so December 8th, we're gonna do that as a church family. And here's my hope. My hope is that if you're here and you're part of this church, and when I say that, I mean like if you're here and you say that this is where I am encouraged, where I'm inspired, where I'm led, where I'm fed, where my family is, where I'm growing spiritually, my hope and prayer, if you call this your church home, is that you'll say, I want to be a part of it. I want to help. I want to do whatever I can to help propel our church into this next season and see us be able to reach more families and see more lives impacted for Christ. That's my hope and prayer, is that we all will. And it's a free will offering. Here's what that means. This is not our tithe. This is not our regular giving. This is one of those above and beyond type of moments. And yes, it's a sacrifice to do, but I really believe in this season of generosity that the greatest thing we can do is that we can give to God's work in our world. I believe it. I believe it. And so I just want to encourage you, this end of the year season and where it's going to culminate, December 8th is going to be a really special day. It always is. It's going to be really powerful and impactful. I encourage you to be here. But here's what I also know as we hear this, because I imagine a lot of you, especially if you're new, the one thought you probably have, and because sometimes I feel this way, is I'm like, that sounds great, but I don't know if you ever feel like when there's such need in the world around us, when there's so many problems, there's so many challenges, sometimes when I look at my situation, this is the way I feel like I have so little to give. Like when I look across the backdrop of our world and how big it is and all the challenges even in our own backyard and all the need, because we feel it as a church, all the people that come to us, we have people this week that show up, they show up during the week, they go, we're struggling, we're hurting, all the situations. When I see all of that, to be honest, I kind of look at my own life and my situation and go, man, I don't have much to give. I don't have a lot. And maybe you're here today as you're hearing about this, you're like, man, we don't have much margin at all. Like we're barely making it. I understand that. That's a real thing. But sometimes, I feel like what I have to give feels insignificant. That I don't know that it'll make that much difference. But here's what I want to remind us. There is something dynamic. There is something powerful that happens when we take what we do have and we put it in the hands of a miracle-working God. Something powerful happens with it. I just want to remind us of that. And honestly, that's why this end of the year series is called MOSAIC. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with MOSAIC, what it is, but a mosaic is an art form. It's a form of art where an artisan or a craftsman will take small little bits and pieces of stone or shells or glass or material that's insignificant, sometimes ceramic or broken pieces of pottery or fragments, things that you and I would just dispose of, things that we would just throw away. But here's what a mosaic is. It's when a master artisan takes those insignificant pieces and then puts it all together to create a masterpiece. That's what a mosaic is. In fact, I know this is kind of like a lost form of art. I think we're losing a lot of forms of art in our very digital world. AI is now creating a lot of the art that we see. But when you see an actual mosaic and you understand the process, to me, I marvel. In fact, one of the oldest mosaics that was ever discovered was this mosaic that was unearthed recently in Turkey. And I know it doesn't look like much, but can I just tell you that this mosaic, they believe, is dated back to the 3rd millennia BC. This is really old, and the fact that we even found it and have it was just found, and it's a mosaic floor. We're using different types of stones and different things to actually create something. And this art form that's very ancient, what we found was that it kind of exploded on the scene when the Greeks kind of got a hold of it and the Romans got a hold of it. That's when they began to use this to create masterpieces of art. And they would take and create these beautiful works of art that would sometimes reflect their culture or their religious beliefs. And it was a beautiful form of art that really took place thousands of years ago. And then as the church kind of came out of even the Roman era, the Christian church began to adopt and use this type of art to create things that you found in old churches and ancient works of art. I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful when you consider what a mosaic is. Now, here's the part that kind of blows my mind. Whenever you look at a mosaic from a distance, right, you can just look at it and it almost just looks like a mural. It just looks like you can make out what it is, and it's like you can just tell. It's like, wow, that's beautiful. Somebody created that when you look at it from a distance. But when you zoom in, you get really close and tight on a mosaic, what you discover is that it's actually made of little, small, insignificant fragments or pieces of material that almost no one would think is worth anything. This is what a mosaic is. And as I was thinking about the idea of a mosaic, I couldn't help but think and wonder if really the whole universe, if you think about it, the world that we're in, the universe that we get to be a part of, to me, it kind of feels like a mosaic. Think about the whole universe. And think about the creator. See, I believe there's a creator behind the universe. I believe there's a creator behind our world. And I don't know how you imagine God. I always think it's weird to imagine God. Sometimes I got all these different pictures in my head, of how do you experience or think about God as some kind of being out there and some cosmic entity that just exists. I think sometimes I imagine God as this utilitarian type cosmic God who just kind of like orders everything. Or sometimes, can I just say this? I picture God like a scientist. I don't know if any of you ever think of it. I do, okay? Sometimes I like to picture God in this white coat, and I imagine dating back, whenever I read Genesis, the account, I'm picturing like the scientist who's like mixing all these different elements together and creating all of these things that we see in our world today. I don't know how you picture God, but one way that I almost never really ever imagine or think about God is an artist. I don't. And yet when you have moments in our world where you come face to face with just such incredible beauty and majesty that it stops you in your tracks, you gotta almost just respect and think of God, the creator, as the master artisan. Don't you? Like, have you ever just been captivated by like one of those late summer evening sunsets? We have such beautiful sunsets sometimes here in Ohio. And I don't know if you've ever caught just a moment where you're outside and you're just seeing these golden rays dance across the sky with all these magenta and burnt orange and red and pink and purple hues. And I don't know if you've ever just looked at the sky like it was a canvas and you thought, wow, God. You ever felt that? It's just like, wow, God. Or sometimes I get that feeling when my feet are stuck in white, fluffy sand in the Caribbean. You ever feel that? Anybody else experience the majesty and beauty of God when the sun is on your skin and you're seeing this turquoise, aquamarine, clear ocean waters of the Caribbean as waves just come after wave, and there's just something in your soul that just finds peace in a moment like that? I don't know if you've ever been in a moment like that where you're just like, wow, God, you make beautiful stuff. I remember when I was a teenager and I got to summit one of the tallest mountains in the Alps in Germany. And I remember as I got up there and the cold air was filling my lungs and I'm looking down upon all these jagged rock and mountaintop summits that come up out of the skies, covering with snow and clouds all around it. There's just something about being in a moment like that when you just take it all in and you're just like, wow, this is beautiful. God, you create beautiful stuff. Can I just tell you, all of that is a mosaic. It's a mosaic of beauty. In fact, I love how the psalmist says this in Psalm 19, verse 1. I just love this. It says, the heavens proclaim the glory of God, and the skies display his craftsmanship. There's moments when we're just captivated by the beauty of the artisan that is God. And the reason why I think it's a mosaic is because when you stand back at a distance and you admire all of that, it makes you feel a certain way. But when you zoom in on it, do you know what you discover? When you unpack the science behind it all, what you discover is that it's comprised of a bunch of insignificant, small little pieces of matter that we would say don't matter. Like the atoms that combine into the molecules that create the beauty and wonder and the stuff that moves your soul. When you look at it up close, it just seems insignificant. I just want you to know this. This isn't just the story of the universe we live in. I think this is also the story of the universe within us. That there's a part of all of us, if we're honest, across the big backdrop of our world that probably feels insignificant. I know I do at times. Like there's a part of all of us, when I think about like there's 8 billion people, And here I am in a small little town in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. This is not some kind of epic place on the map, right? When we think about where we are, when I think about my own story and my life, and I realize that it's like really small. On a microscopic level, it's really insignificant. I'm not that important, and I'm not that famous, and I'm not that successful, and I'm not this, and I'm not that. And when I see my life on the backdrop of all of humanity and history, can I just be honest? I feel really insignificant. I feel like, what difference does it make that I'm here, right? I don't know if you ever feel that way, but sometimes I do. And I think the world will go on without me, and it won't even skip a beat. But then, can I just say there's also a tension inside my soul? I don't know if you feel this tension, but sometimes I've got a tension inside of my soul that there's part of me that wants to matter. You ever feel that way? Like, I want to matter. I want to imagine that my existence is not just some byproduct of random mutation operated by nature, but I want to believe that maybe there is an actual intention for why I'm here. That I'm not just an accident of cosmic proportions, but that maybe there was a reason, a purpose, a meaning behind my existence. I think we all wrestle with this, something unique about the human psyche, that we're all asking these really big questions about why am I here and do I even matter? There's a tension inside of me. Even if you're a person of faith, can I just be honest, sometimes it's hard to imagine that God would ever be able to use me when I think about my story. I think sometimes when we think about our story, we think it's either insignificant, or maybe we think about it's messed up, it's flawed. You know, it's the idea that, okay, if there is a God out there, and if God did create me with purpose, and that God does want to use me to do something, that's great. The problem is I feel sometimes like, how could God use someone as sinful and messed up as me? You ever feel that way? Like sometimes, I mean, just be honest, right? Like sometimes I look at my own life and I'm just like, man, Tim, you wrestle with sin just like everybody else, and you've got to take captive your thoughts because your thoughts will wander and they shouldn't wander, and you deal with selfishness all the time, and you deal with greed, and you deal with all this. Like, you ever just kind of go, how in the world is God going to use a broken, fragmented piece like me? Have you ever felt that way? I'd love to introduce you to another broken piece. His name was Paul. Now, Paul was a guy who lived around the turn of the century, going back 2,000 years ago. And Paul was a guy who was, let's say, lived during the time of Jesus, but his story seems so insignificant that he's never even mentioned in the gospel accounts of Jesus. Like, he's probably young at this time. He was kind of a young guy who was raised in this religious group called the Pharisees. Now, that was the same group of people, the same sect, religious sect, that actually arrested Jesus and turned him over to Rome to be executed. And so this is Paul's upbringing. And Paul is like, he's just trying to kind of make a way for himself in this religious order. And as soon as Jesus resurrected and then he went to heaven, and then the church got started, we don't even hear about Paul until the church takes off. And the moment the church, this movement begins that you and I are a part of, okay? This movement that gets started 2,000 years ago, the moment it does, Paul's religious order actually is trying to stop it. He's trying to squash it. He's trying to kill this movement. And the first place that we even hear of Paul is when there's this mob-type scene that's being led by this religious group that ends up murdering a guy named Stephen, all because he's sharing that he believed in Jesus and that Jesus rose from the dead and that he had a hope for knowing Jesus and for salvation. And so all he's doing is sharing a message. And Paul, the first time we see him, he's there, he's casting a vote, he's holding everybody's coats so that they can pick up big rocks and throw them and kill and murder Stephen. And something in this whole mob-type scene kind of incites something in Paul. Paul kind of figures, well, you know what? This is my opportunity to make a name for myself. I'm going to be something significant. And so he goes to the chief priest and he says, hey, give me written instructions. I'm gonna go to all these towns around the area and let me just put an end to this movement. I'm gonna arrest every one of those Jesus followers. We'll lock them up, throw them in prison. And if you know Paul's story, right? Paul's on his way to a town called Damascus to do that very thing. When all of a sudden he had an encounter with a resurrected Jesus who from heaven shone this bright light down on him. In this one encounter, in this one moment with Jesus, changed everything about Paul's life. In fact, if you have your Bible with you today, I would love for us to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. I know you thought I was going to Acts, but I'm not. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Because I want to just look at what Paul, as he recalls this kind of moment when he first encounters Jesus. Because Paul, the way he saw himself was broken, messed up. How in the world could God ever use someone like me? And here's what he says in 1 Corinthians 15. If you got your app, you can follow along. We got notes there. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 5. Here's how Paul describes it. He talks about Jesus here. He said, Jesus, he was seen by Peter and then the 12. Well, that makes sense. Those were his disciples, right? And after that, he was seen by more than 500 of his followers at the same time, at one time. He says, most of whom are still alive, though some have died. Now, that's a really important statement Paul makes historically, because he says, hey, Jesus actually appeared to hundreds and hundreds of people. Most of them are still alive. Fact check me. That's what he's saying. And Paul wrote this while most of them were still alive. This was a big deal, okay? You don't fabricate this if people can prove you wrong. And then he says this in verse 7. He says, then he was seen by James, his half-brother, and later by all the apostles. Then verse 8, he says, last of all, as though I had been born at the wrong time, I also saw him. Verse 9, he says, for I am the least of all the apostles. In fact, he says, I am not even worthy to be called an apostle after the way I persecuted God's church. I love Paul. Do you pick up on like his tone? He's like, Jesus appeared to all of these people. Makes sense. He appeared to Peter and his disciples. They all believed in him and followed him when he was alive. He appeared to all those people who were his followers, who really believed him. I mean, that all makes sense. He appeared to even James, it's his half-brother. He didn't believe, but it was his brother, okay? He appears to all of those people, and then this makes no sense. Like as someone who, honestly, I should not have had this opportunity. It's like I somehow was in the right place and at the right time, but I should have been born. I was born in the wrong. He said, I don't understand this, but he appeared to me. And the reason why he says that is because I was the guy who was trying to kill this movement. I was the guy who was on the other side of God. I was the guy who was trying to stop all of these Jesus followers. I thought he was a phony. I thought he was a liar. And Paul, right here in this moment to the church in Corinth, he's reminiscing over that. I can't fathom how God would ever choose to use me. I don't know if any of you have ever felt that way, but can I just tell you I have. You know, it's that whole phrase, sometimes we say, God, if you can use anyone, would you use me? I think a lot of us, sometimes we don't really figure that God can use us in our story. I know because there was a time when I wasn't a pastor and when I'd be sitting in your seat, and this is the way I would think. Okay, well, I guess God will use you because you're a pastor and you preach and you lead a church. But God wouldn't use me. I'm an accountant. I'm a teacher. I'm an architect. I'm a construction worker. And I think a lot of times, to be honest, maybe we can actually identify with Paul. You know, here's the list of the who's who. You know, today we go, wow, there's Billy Graham. God used him. There's C.S. Lewis. Whew, God used him. And, you know, let's go through all the greats. God used them. Martin Luther, changed everything. God used them. All the way down, I go, there's Tim. Not sure why God would ever use me. In other words, I think a lot of times we feel both unqualified and disqualified. You ever feel that way? Sometimes I feel unqualified. I'm not good. Maybe some of you would go, I don't know the Bible very well. I don't have a lot to offer. I don't have hardly any followers on social media. Like, I'm really unqualified. Like, somebody asked me a question, I'm like, I don't know, come to church. You can ask my pastor. I don't even know, right? Some of you would probably go, man, I feel so unqualified that God would ever use me to do anything significant. And then sometimes it's not just unqualified, but let's be honest, sometimes we feel disqualified. If you only knew what I've done, I do not want to tell you, but if you had only known the things I've thought, if you had only seen, I have a record, I have an addiction, I've got 3 failed marriages, I filed bankruptcy twice, I ran the business into the ground. I don't know what it is, but here's what I know. In our minds, most of us, we're playing back, and when I say, hey, God wants to use you, and God wants to use us, and he wants to do something, and here's what I think. Most of us go, I wish that were true, but I'm pretty unqualified, and to be honest, quite disqualified. And if that's the case, then I just tell you, Paul, the guy who is known for writing about 2/3 of the New Testament, someone we would say is an absolute hero or legend, that's exactly how he felt about himself. And then he said something in verse 10 that I think is one of my favorite verses in the entire New Testament. In fact, I want to read it in the NIV because there's a phrase that is used that I just always captivated my heart. In verse 10, he says this, but by the what? Can you all say that word out loud? But by the, come on, let's do it again. But by the grace of God, he says, I am what I am. And his grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them. Okay, you're bragging now, Paul. Yet not I. He said, but that was the grace of God that was with me. He said, I don't deserve to be used by God. You know the truth is none of us do. None of us do. He says, I don't deserve to be used by God, but his grace. But by his grace, he says, I am what I am. Now, I think every time I've heard that phrase, I am what I am, most of the time, it's our resignation for, hey, I've tried to get my life in the right direction. I've tried to do the right things, but I'm stuck in these patterns. I keep kind of making the same mistakes over and over. When we say I am what I am, most of us are picturing all of our failures, our mistakes in our past. That's what we would say. I am what I am, right? We'd say, I am an ex-con. I am an addict. I am broke. I am divorced. I am whatever. I am depressed. I am insignificant. I am. And listen, Paul, he would tell you, guess what? I got my own list of I am statements. Paul would say, I am an enemy of God when he was on his way to Damascus. He would say that I am someone who's trying to stop Jesus in this movement. I am someone who gave approval so that Stephen would be murdered. I'm actually responsible. He would say, I am on the wrong side of this. So Paul would say, I've got all these I am statements too. And so I don't know what your I am story looks like, but Paul says, I got a bad I am story, but my I am story changed the moment I met the great I am. That's when everything began to change. In other words, the moment I encountered the grace of God. Can I just say, there's some of you that are brand new to faith. Anytime you hear about the grace of God, it moves you. And then there are some of us who've been walking with Jesus for a long time, and the grace of God feels so elementary that we've kind of forgotten how powerful it is. All I wanted to do today, as we begin this series, was just remind us about the grace of God. Do you realize how special the grace of God is? Do you know what grace means? It means unmerited favor. It means I get more than I deserve. I get better than I deserve. When I think about my life, my story, my situation, can I just be honest? Where I am today, what God has done in my life, the way I feel forgiven, the way I feel like I have purpose, the way I feel like I have reason to live, the way I feel like I have calling in my life, the way I have a family, and the way I have joy in my life and I have peace in my life. Can I just tell you, all of that is because of the grace of God, not because I earned it, I worked hard for it, but can I just tell you, I am a trophy of God's grace. And I don't know if any of you have forgotten what God has done, because I think the longer you walk with Christ, the easier it is to forget what he rescued you from, what he saved you from, what he's done in your life. But can I just tell you, when you meet the grace of God, it will humble you. It will cause you to drop to your knees and say, God, thank you. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve eternity with him. I don't deserve hope. I don't deserve any of that, but by his grace. Can I just tell you what grace does in our story? It flips the script. It changes things. I don't care where you've been. I don't care what you've done. I don't care what kind of record you have. I don't care how littered your past is. I don't care the wake of your story. Can I just tell you, the grace of God will flip your script and will change your forever future. There's something about the grace of God. Paul says, but by the grace of God, I am what I am. When he says that, he's saying, I don't even understand why he would do this to me, but I am a child of God, even though I was an enemy of God. I don't even deserve it. He says, I'm an apostle, and I don't even get it. You shouldn't even call me an apostle because I got such a messed up story. But he says, God can use broken, messed up, fragmented people like me to do something to change the world. Can I just tell you, there's something about the grace of God, he says, in my life that changed my story. Let me say this. It not only changes you, but it changes your story. It changes your story. So can I ask you a question? Just a real simple question today. What's the story of your life? I just wanted to ask you that question. What's the story of your life? And when I say, what's the story of your life? And I know this feels a little morbid, but what is it that you imagine people would say about you when you're gone? I know we don't like to think about that. But the longer I live, the more I do think like that. What's the story of your life? What's the plot that is you? I imagine that maybe there's so many people in this space right now, and you maybe worked really hard most of your life. Imagine maybe people would say, wow, he was a hard worker. That's great. I hope we all work really hard. Can I tell you, I sure hope that's not what people are saying about me. He worked hard. She was really kind to everybody. That's awesome. I hope we're all kind to everyone. But can I just tell you, I hope that's not the story of my life. They were really successful. He, she, they were really successful. They built something, they did this, and wow, they really created something. That's awesome. I hope we all can do something really beautiful and successful with our lives. But can I just tell you, I hope that's not the story of my life. I hope that's not what people are saying about me. I hope people are saying more than that. I hope people are saying, he changed this world. I know, it's so hard to imagine that. I know. Okay, how about this? I hope people would say, he changed my world. I hope someday, because we're all going to have the final date inscribed on our stone, I hope someday that could be said of all of us. Because he lived, because she lived, my life was changed. My kids' lives were changed. Our story changed. See, Paul said that God's grace wasn't without effect. In other words, I didn't just meet a gracious God who forgave me of my sin, but his grace actually changed me. In other words, there was an effect. There was something that transformed in my life. I'm not just someone who walks around through life and goes, well, I got my ticket to heaven punched because God gave me grace. No, when I encounter the grace of God, you know what it means? It means my story changes. It means that I come and understand that God's grace doesn't just save me from a really messed up past, but it also gives me an incredible future. I wish we could see God's grace through that lens. It's not just for your past, but it's also for your future. In other words, God does have a plan and purpose for your life. I do not believe you're a cosmic accident. I do not believe you're an insignificant piece in the mix of matter in our world on the backdrop. You're not just a pebble in the sea of humanity. I believe that God had intention in creating all of us. He has purpose, and we do not discover that until we encounter the grace of God. But the moment we encounter the grace of God, my story changes, and now I don't want to live for my name. I want to live for His name. I don't want to just live for a paycheck. I want to live for purpose. I want to have a reason for getting up every single day. Because God's grace can turn our worst moments into our greatest story. I hope you'd receive that today. I think sometimes it's just show up in church and just go, I sit in a seat. No, God had more in store for you than that. And when you experience His grace, it changes you. That's why the same Paul, who said those words, who couldn't even understand why God would ever use him, said these words in Ephesians 2. I'm going to close Ephesians 2. Verse 8, he said, God saved you by His what? Say it out loud, by His. Come on, I just want us to remember His grace today. If you forget everything else that happened today, that's fine. Would you leave here just feeling appreciative and overwhelmed by His grace? He saved you by His grace when you believed, and I love this, and you can't take credit for it. It's a gift from God. But get this, he says, salvation's not a reward for the good things that we've done. I can't earn it. So that none of us can boast about it. And then verse 10, this is, when I thought about MOSAIC, this is the verse I thought about. Verse 10 says this, for we are God's what? Say it out loud. We are God's, come on, say it together. We are God's masterpiece. You're a mosaic. You're part of a masterpiece. And you yourself are actual masterpiece, that He's created us anew in Christ Jesus so that we can do the good things that He's planned for us long ago. In other words, God's grace comes to your life to transform you and to give you a future and to give you purpose and to give you plans to walk in those things. It's not just to meet you and save you of your sin, but it's also to give you purpose and direction for the rest of your life. Can I just say this? You might feel like I'm just one person. What can I do in this world? And I get that. I feel that way a lot of times. But if I could tell you, take one insignificant small person or piece like me and let my life be the canvas that God's grace begins to work. And all of a sudden, He's creating a masterpiece. Can I just tell you, you're a masterpiece? You're a masterpiece. And I think what God is creating through our church is also a masterpiece. It's a mosaic. It's a work of art. When you take a community of people that don't look the same and all believe the same and vote the same, that don't matter. And when they come together on the one thing that we do agree on, which is we all need God's grace, and then we say, God, whatever you did in my life is about what we're going to do moving forward. Can I just tell you that our church, I believe, is a mosaic. It's a masterpiece of God's grace. And when the world encounters the beauty that is, I even believe, our church, when it sees all of these individual pieces that are just broken fragments of existence, but now we have purpose. Now we've got a reason to actually love and serve and give and do things in this world. You know, every time you invite somebody to the church so that they can encounter God's grace, you're a part of the masterpiece, the mosaic that God's doing. And every time you serve in kids and out in the parking lot and you run a camera and you're someone who's actively a part of what God's doing in this church, every time you give, you're actually a part of the mosaic, this art that God is creating. And do you know what it spells in this world? It's love. It's so that the world can know that God loves them. And all it takes is a yes. That's all it takes is a yes. Why don't you stand up with me? We're going to close. This is just a foundational message as we begin this series. But can I just encourage you. If you're someone who maybe has never fully embraced the grace of God, maybe you've been coming for a while, maybe you've been around church, but you come face to face with a God who loves you so much, and you actually look at Paul's life and you go, he, I think, was a little worse than I was. God's grace can meet Paul, it can meet you. And not just forgive you of all the things you've done in your past, but can I just tell you, it's also to give you a purpose and a future. It's to give you something, a calling to walk in meaning and intention in your soul. And there's something so powerful about the grace of God. And I just want to say to the person who's been following Jesus for 50 years that you're here, I hope that we never lose sight of how powerful God's grace is. Don't ever allow it to not be special. Don't ever allow yourself to get to a point where you know what? Because here's what happens. When you take for granted the grace of God, you start to think, I earned this. When you take for granted the grace of God, that's when you start to rest on your own religious, righteous acts. That's when we become self-righteous. That's when we become like the Pharisees. Is when we think we don't need God's grace every single day. I don't ever want to be like that. I'll be the broken one who stands up here and says, I'm messed up, I'm screwed up, and I need His grace every day. And I'm going to need His grace tomorrow. And I'm going to need His grace on Tuesday. And I hope that you have a heart where you say, God, I just need your grace. Come on, close your eyes with me if you would. Let's just turn our heart and our attention to God right now. God, I'm just so grateful for your grace. I just don't deserve it. Come on, I want in your own way for you just in this moment. What does it look like for you just to tell that to God? God, I don't deserve your grace, but you gave it anyways. Maybe tell him thank you. Thank you, God, that you would be able to use a wretched, broken vessel of a person like me. Thank you, God. And I don't deserve it. That's why it's grace. If you're here today and maybe you don't know the grace of God, maybe you came in today and your picture of God is that He's mad, He's angry. Maybe you just feel so far away from Him. Maybe there was a time when you had embraced Jesus, but the truth is you have just walked away from Him. Maybe God brought you here today to remind you of His grace. Can I just tell you, there is no place that you can run that will run away from the grace of God. You cannot use up the grace of God. You cannot get to a point where you go, there's no way He would ever take me back because of what I've done. You do not know the grace of God. It is so much bigger than anything you've ever done. And maybe you're here today. And maybe you need to make a decision right now to say yes. How do I receive grace? Just say yes. By faith, you just say, God, I receive it. Maybe if you're here today, you're watching this online today, you're ready to receive the grace of God for your life. He will forgive you. He will make you new. He will create you into a masterpiece. If that's your prayer, your desire today in this space, I just want to invite you in this moment just to pray a prayer with me. You say, Jesus, today I receive your grace. As one who does not deserve it and I did not earn it, but I receive your grace in this place, Jesus. I ask you to forgive me of my sin. I ask you, God, to change my life. I put my life into your hands. This is me saying yes by faith. In Jesus' name today, I receive your grace, God. Thanks so much for tuning into this message. I hope that it encouraged you and inspired your faith. If God is doing something in your life, would you take a moment and let us know? We want to connect with you and we want to be able to pray for you. All you have to do is shoot us an email to hello@thex.church, or you can always send us a DM on one of our social media platforms. And if you know somebody that would also be encouraged by this very message, why not take a moment and just share it with them right now? And as always, I want to say thank you to every single person who so generously financially supports this ministry so we can continue to get messages like these out to people all over the world. We believe God is building something special and you're a significant part of it. Until next time, have a great day.